William, do you want to do the introductions? It looks like we've got everyone pretty much.
All right, I'd be happy to. So it is indeed my great pleasure and privilege to introduce Tayfun Sonmez for our 2021 Gilbert lecture. So Tayfun's academic career started at Bilkent University, the first of several universities that I think have completely changed the face of academics in Turkey. Tayfun was one of the first graduates of that university, and my understanding is actually the first graduate to obtain a PhD in any field from that university. He came to Rochester in 1991, got his PhD in 1995, and held position at the University of Michigan, Koch University, and then Boston College. Tayfun is the author of many, many important papers that have completely revolutionized the field of economic design. Together with another student of ours, Attila Abdulkaroglu, he has written several seminal papers on the problem of school choice, which has to do with the allocation of students to school in a school district. That subject has, those papers have spawned a considerable literature, and the entire academic conferences have been devoted to the subject. And more importantly, many, many school districts have changed the algorithm in order to learn the lessons of those papers that have been written by Tayfun and his co-authors and his followers. Tayfun has written some very important papers on other subjects. One of them is organ transplant. He has written, again, seminal papers on the subject, on particular kidney allocation, but also on liver transplant. And last week, a couple of weeks ago, we heard a paper on blood bank by one of his colleagues at BC. And the field of economic design has grown considerably and now covers a whole range of other subjects, like refugee allocation and visa allocation, teacher reassignment, and the list goes on and on. In response to the pandemic, Tayfun has written a paper on the allocation of ventilators, and today he will talk about the problem of vaccine allocation. Tayfun is a very hands-on person, and if it were standard conferences, I'm sure he will be ready to vaccinate us. But instead, we'll just hear his word about the theory of allocation of vaccine. Tayfun, the floor is yours. Thank you. It's my great honor and privilege to have you here.
Well, thank you very much. First, I would like to say a few words. I'm very proud and humbled to give the 54th Memorial Gilbert Lecture at my alma mater. 30 years ago this month, literally 30 years ago, I was accepted to the graduate program at Rochester. It was not a difficult decision for me. Rochester was my only admission with any financial aid. Had Rochester not given me this opportunity, I would not be able to receive a graduate degree in economics. But beyond that, I now know that it was a blessing that my only financial aid was indeed from Rochester. Given my personality and skills, I know without any shred of doubt that I would not achieve a fraction of what I have had I been trained at any other program. Not at Harvard, not at MIT, not at Stanford, nowhere else. Apart from the exceptional education I have received at Rochester, which exists elsewhere as well, I found something that I believe exists at no other program. I found an advisor and mentor in William Thompson, who has an endless scholarly passion for research. Excuse me. And more importantly, research of his students. It is the scholarly passion and the rigor I have inherited, I have inherited from William that made the difference for me. I mean, this very much sounds like a gift exchange now, but it isn't. I mean, thank you, William. Thank you, Rochester.
Thank you, Tayfun.
You know, too much passion is sometimes good, sometimes not. But it is what it is. So today I will talk about fair allocation of vaccines, ventilators, and antiviral treatments, leaving no ethical value behind in healthcare rationing. You know, William is the best thing that happened to me academically. But I also had my fair share of other great things happening. And you see the names of three of them here. My partners in crime, Parag, Pathak, Utku, Unver, and Bumin, Yenmez. So this is joint work with them. So COVID-19 pandemic has spurred renewed interest in guidelines for allocating scarce medical resources. These guidelines cover a wide range of public health emergencies for scarce items such as ventilators, ICU beds, antivirals, vaccines, and so on. By and large, these guidelines in the field and also in scholarly literatures in bioethics and emergency healthcare, they restrict their attention to variants of a priority system as their allocation mechanism of consideration. In this presentation, I will argue that the priority system is just too restrictive, presenting evidence on how decision makers who are restricted to existing guidelines often struggle to integrate or balance the desired ethical values. To increase the flexibility of the system, we propose a reserve system. We develop a general theory of reserve system design, and we relate our analysis to current societal debates and report preliminary policy impact. So let me give some background. COVID-19 pandemic has motivated policymakers to revisit existing or issue new guidelines on allocating medical resources. The key references here are Emmanuel et al. And Trog et al. On a 2020 New England Journal of Medicine piece, on two pieces. These guidelines appeal to various ethical principles, including saving the most lives, saving the most life years, the life cycle principle, which basically says everybody should have an opportunity to go through all phases of life, instrumental value, which considers the additional goods a person can do if that person is saved. Reciprocity is similar, but for past good deeds, and equal access. These principles can compete with each other. For example, equal access ignores patient age, while the life cycle principle explicitly considers it. An allocation mechanism, therefore, must implement the desired balance of ethical values. For some ethical values, only individual attributes are relevant, and they may have a natural or a well-established cardinal measure. The most obvious one for that would be life cycle principle. Age is a very obvious metric here. But for others too, there are some metrics. For example, for the utilitarian goal of saving the most lives, in the context of ventilator ICU allocation, a metric called sequential organ failure assessment score is considered a good metric. Now, under this metric, each of 6 organ groups, lungs, liver, brain, kidneys, blood clotting, and blood pressure, is assigned a score of 1 to 4, with higher scores for more severely failed organs. By and large, most pandemic allocation guidelines worldwide rely on versions of a priority system to implement the desired balance of values. For vaccine allocation, that takes the form of priority systems based on priority tiers. For ventilator or ICU allocation, that takes the form of Priortopoint systems. So if we go back about a year earlier and think about the ventilator allocation at the time, in that context, as I mentioned, the SOFA score is considered a good proxy for mortality risk in crisis scenarios. Therefore, if the sole ethical value under consideration is the utilitarian goal of saving the most lives, a single principal point system based on SOFA scores may be a good choice for ventilator or ICU allocation. But if there are multiple ethical values, as urged by the majority of experts, then a Priortopoint system is too restrictive to reach an ethically compelling balance between the desired values. It maps individual attributes to a numeric scale, and therefore it cannot even incorporate principles which lack a cardinal and monotonic representation, let alone aggregate them. For example, it cannot accommodate distributional objectives such as proportional representation of disadvantaged groups. During the initial phases of the COVID-19 pandemic, while recognizing the need to consider multiple ethical values, due to the urgency, many states adopted a Priortopoint system based on SOFA scores only. Others have adopted multi-principal Priortopoint systems to accommodate multiple ethical values. And for ventilator allocation, in the first months of the pandemic, the Priortopoint system emerged as the mechanism of choice in the US, being adopted in more than half of the states. The remaining, except Michigan, the other states did not announce a system. And at Michigan, they adopted the regular priority system. So all announced systems were priority. Vast majority of these systems were adopted in haste after the COVID-19 pandemic. Now, a priority system is restrictive because it allocates all units based on a single priority ranking, sometimes mapping individual attributes to a numeric scale. The issue with that is some principles may not have a monotonic cardinal representation, and others may either partially or fully depend on group structure. Aggregation across ethical values also raises the question of so-called incommensurability. This is the issue of adding apples and oranges, and this is an active debate in ethics. So let me next illustrate some of the consequences of these shortcomings, focusing on recent debates on essential personnel priority for ventilator allocation. Many argue that essential personnel should receive priority under pandemic resource allocation systems. This view is also strongly endorsed by medical ethicists based on the backward-looking principle of reciprocity, the forward-looking principle of instrumental value, and also due to the incentives it creates, or rather disincentives from not going to your job. But giving them priority for ventilators may also discourage absenteeism. In order to issue their guidelines in a timely manner at the outset of the COVID-19 crisis, some states remained vague about essential personnel priority despite being precise on other details. So they give a very clear formula and then some unclear aspects. Initially, Massachusetts recommended a Priortopoint system that relies on rigorous clinical criteria, but it casually suggested heightened priority for essential personnel. This bullet will be important. I will come back to it later on when I'm talking about policy impact. The Pittsburgh guideline initially specified two tiebreakers, one based on age and the other based on essential personnel status. However, it was silent on how to use these tiebreakers. The vagueness in these cases sharply contrasts with widely accepted causal clarity in pandemic resource allocation guidelines. And you could see, lots of headlines on these issues. What is worse, perhaps, is states such as New York and Minnesota, and this became before pandemic, they had to give up on essential personnel priority, largely due to concerns about extreme scenarios where no resources may remain for the rest of the society due to the way priority system works. For example, in Minnesota guidelines, they said it is possible that they, meaning essential personnel, would use most, if not all, of the short supply of ventilators. Other groups systematically would be deprived access. Or in New York, in a very influential guideline, it may mean that only healthcare workers obtain access to ventilators in certain communities. This approach may leave no ventilators for community members, including children. This alternative was unacceptable to the task force. So what's happening here is they are trying to include essential personnel priority in their systems, but the technology they use doesn't allow to do so without risking extreme outcomes. The bottom line is a limitation of an allocation mechanism designed to implement ethical values resulted in abandoning these values. So that was our starting point. It is clear that many challenges of the priority system stem from its restriction of relying on a single priority ranking of patients to allocate each and every unit. Therefore, a remedy has to break that limiting feature. We need some heterogeneity in the system, in the property rights, if you wish. A reserve system that we propose divides resources into multiple categories and allows for distinct criteria for allocation of units in different categories. These category-specific criteria reflect the balance of ethical values guiding allocation of units in that given category. We didn't invent, reserve systems, although we contributed to its adequate implementation and understanding. Some real-life applications of reserve systems include deceased donor kidney allocation in the US, assignment of slots for Boston and New York City marathons, H-1B visa allocation in the US, school choice procedures in Boston, Chicago, New York, and Chile, affirmative action in India, college admissions in Brazil, and there are many more. So what is a reserve system? A reserve system is a categorized version of a priority system, if you wish. The primitives of this system is division of the total supply of resources into multiple categories, the size of each category, and a category-specific priority order of individuals for each category. These are kind of straightforward parameters of the problem. And unfortunately, in most applications, policymakers think these are the only parameters to consider. And the technical part of the talk is about that misconception. In most applications, even though most of the time policymakers will not realize that, and even as academics, we didn't realize that for a long time, it is also necessary to specify what to do when an individual qualifies for a unit through multiple reserve categories. So if I'm old age and also essential personnel, and if there is priority for both of them, which one do I consume? It doesn't matter for me, but it matters for others. Okay, this is what what the theoretical aspect is all about. Since the units are identical, an individual does not care about the category through which she receives a unit, but this choice influences the outcome for other individuals. Now, this last point is often either misunderstood or completely ignored in real-life applications, resulting in unintended distributional consequences. And these can be quite substantial. For example, in Boston, and this is the first time the importance of this phenomenon was understood, in a joint work with Unver, Parag, Pathak, and Scott Commoners, we have shown that Boston de facto lost its votes on priority just because they implemented their reserves right. With Parag, Pathak and Alex Rhys-Jones, last year we have shown that something similar happened in H-1B visa allocation, and indeed 2 years ago, Trump administration observed the relevance of this parameter and changed the distributional outcome quite significantly and intentionally to increase the education level of the awardees without needing to consult to the Congress. Okay, we therefore present the general theory of reserve systems. Today's plan for the theory will be, we'll formulate 3 intuitive axioms and examine their implications. We formulate the cutoff equilibrium solution concept, linking our axioms to real-life applications, extend the prior analysis of sequential reserve matching policies, which dominate real-life applications, and we'll formulate some potential shortcomings of sequential reserve matching policies and introduce and analyze smart reserve matching policies as a remedy. So the next half an hour or so will be more formal, and then another 20 minutes, I'll talk about policy. So what are the primitives of this model? I is a set of patients, each in need of 1 unit of a good. Q is the number of identical medical units in short supply. C is the set of reserve categories. RC is the number of units subject to category C allocation criteria, where pi C is a strict priority order of patients for units in category C. Okay, and pi underbar C is the weak order induced by pi C. For example, if I say I pi C empty set, that means patient I is eligible for category C, and so on and so forth. Now, one important point is, even though I'm speaking about patients and medical units, the theory will be considerably more general than that, and it will also relate to affirmative action, H-1B visa allocation, and I will keep the model pretty flexible to be able to accommodate these applications as well, although I will be speaking of patients and so on. So here we'll make one important modeling choice. A matching mu is an assignment of each patient either to a category or to an empty set, such that no category is assigned to more patients than the number of its units. So my outcome here is not quite traditional. Traditionally, when you are selecting a number of individuals from a good, you typically use a choice rule, simply indicating, who receives the unit. For my purposes, that will not be sufficient. I also want to specify who receives a unit, not only who receives a unit, but also through what privilege, through what category. Now, in some applications, depending on what you are trying to do, you can get away with this and you can do everything you want to do with a choice rule. However, if I consider the application in India, for instance, affirmative action in India, that their laws by Supreme Court explicitly tells that those people who receive a unit from open category should have higher scores than those who are receiving it through their vertical reservation intended for historically discriminated against groups. So basically, what they are saying is you gotta use the higher score individuals for the open competition and not for the reserve units. Okay, to be able to specify that and also to formulate the laws in India, I need this structure. I need to specify who is receiving a unit through what. Or at the beginning of the pandemic, there was a crisis in Alabama in terms of disability rights, disabled individuals' rights, because they were excluded for ventilator allocation. And there were lots of lawsuits, not only in Alabama, in other places as well, Washington, for example. So one thing that we said is, okay, look, okay, we understand what you're trying to do. This is for efficiency, and it's clearly indicated for so. But at the same time, you know, this is a little bit too extreme. What you could do is you can at least give them eligibility in some of the units. Okay, so to be able to describe policies like that, I need to deal with the matching rather than with the choice rule. This is a very important modeling choice because of that. And even though patients are indifferent between all units, their claims over units in different categories are potentially different. So the heterogeneity here does not come because of preferences, but it comes because of the budget set. Okay, I will have three very basic axioms, which is basically relevant, and I don't know any application, practical application, where any of these axioms actually fails. I will say that a matching complies with eligibility requirements if patients only receive units from categories for which they are eligible. Okay, I'll say that a matching is non-wasteful if no unit from any category remains idle while there is an eligible patient who remains unserved for that category. And finally, I will say that a matching respects priorities if no patient remains unserved while a unit from some category C is awarded to a lower category C priority patient, right? Why are you having these priorities if you'll not follow them? So now what I'll do is I will formulate a solution concept, which is basically our good old Walrasian equilibrium, market equilibrium. For any category C, a cutoff FC is either an individual or nothing, empty set, such that the cutoff has at least as high priority as the empty set. Think of this as the price, okay? Think of this as a non-negative price. So the cutoff is expressed in terms of a cutoff individual. This person is the very last person who gained admission to this particular elite school, for instance. It plays the same role as a non-negative price. For a given cutoff vector F, the budget set of patient I is, it is all those categories for which the person clears the cutoff, right? Then a cutoff equilibrium is a cutoff vector matching pair such that for each patient, their assignment should be in their budget set. And moreover, unless this person is not eligible for any actual category, he shouldn't be assigned empty set. So what is this? This is utility maximization within budget set. Okay, like the first condition is utility maximization within budget set. And what is the second condition? For any category C, if you do not fill all the positions attached to that capacity, attached to that category, the price should go to 0, right? This is the market clearing condition. A matching mu is a cutoff matching if it is supported by some cutoff vector F at the cutoff equilibrium F mu. Very simple. So I just introduced the counterpart of market mechanism here.
Tayfun, sorry to interrupt. The budget set is the categories I'm assigned to? Is that the
categories that you clear?
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Given your priority. So, cutoff, your budget set depends on the prices, right? Which are the cutoffs. Yeah. You know, which schools you have enough score to be admitted. Okay, that is the budget set. Okay. Now, it is very widespread practice to describe the outcome of a reserve system through its cutoff equilibrium. Most of the time, institutions might not even specify the entire outcome. They sometimes will just announce the cutoff scores, often utilizing a metric that is used to construct the priority order at each category. This is the case for many real-life applications. Okay, so basically, this cutoff equilibrium concept already exists in real life, although it is not formally taught in that particular way. You'll have, cutoff, announcements like that in many applications, right? Our first analytical result shows a strong link between our three axioms and the cutoff equilibrium solution concept. A matching satisfies these three axioms if and only if it is a cutoff matching, okay? And in a way, this gives a strong support both for the axioms and also for the solution concept, okay? Now, let me show how to construct a cutoff vector, okay? If I already have a matching which satisfies these axioms, okay? Give me a matching that works. Let me construct the cutoff, okay? So what is this picture? So I have 8 people, okay? And their priority ranking based on the merit score, for instance, is, I1, I2, so on and so forth. And I have 3 open units, okay? And this is open meaning open competition. So this is unreserved units, if you wish. I have also 3 units which gives preferential treatment to essential personnel, okay? They are pink units, okay? And for those units, I have another priority. And it is constructed by simply upgrading the priority of the red people who are essential personnel, okay? Now, let me start with the matching. And right now, I'm not specifying how I find that matching, but that matching actually, it's easy to see that it satisfies the 3 axioms. Later, I will give methods to find these matchings, but right now, let me have it, okay? So how do I find the cutoff? It's very simple. One thing that I can do is, at each category, I can look at the lowest priority person who received a unit. Obviously, that is a viable cutoff, right? Now, this is not, however, the only cutoff that might work. And to see that, let me do the following. Even though, these people receiving gray units, they are receiving the open units, let me put all the goods here in both lines, okay? This observation allows me to push the cutoff price as low as individual E3 for the pink, for the open category, and as much as to I2, right? So in a way, I can artificially lower the cutoff a little bit. The price is not unique. However, we will focus on the maximum cutoff vector. Cutoff is not the big part. Cutoff vector is not the big part of the story anyways. It is the cutoff matching, okay? But this cutoff vector is important. The upper limit is important because it has a very clear interpretation, okay? This upper cutoff indicates the selectivity of a category, right? How competitive it is. The higher priority cutoff individual is, the more competitive the category is, okay? Now, if I'm given a matching that satisfies these axioms, I showed you how to find the cutoff price, and it's kind of trivial. But how do you find cutoff equilibrium matchings, right? How do you, and especially in complicated problems? What I'll do is I will start with reserve systems where categories are processed sequentially for a given sequence of categories, okay? Now, not all reserve systems have to process categories sequentially. And indeed, I advocate that they shouldn't in general, for reasons that will become clear at the end of the analytical part. But in almost all real-life applications, they actually do. So it is very important to understand these systems, okay? Because almost uniformly, these rules are used. To define this subclass of reserved systems, I need one additional parameter, which we call order of precedence, okay? An order of precedence specifies the processing sequence of categories. So when I say category C precedes category C prime, this means all units in category C are to be allocated before all units in category C prime, okay, under these systems. So under a sequential reserve matching, you fix a processing sequence of the categories, or you fix an order of precedence. And following these sequence, one category at a time, you allocate units in each category C to the highest category C priority patients up to capacity. Okay, very simple. You first fill the essential personnel units, then units reserved for the old age, and so on and so forth. Okay. Now, I will show that this sequence is highly important and relevant and somewhat non-trivial. Okay. To do so, let's consider the following example. Suppose I have 100 units to allocate, which is indicated by this box at the top. Okay, and 80 of them are open for open competition, and 20 of them give priority for essential personnel. They are red. I have 100 essential personnel, which I just indicate as a continuum here, but the model is discrete actually. Doesn't really matter. It makes presentation easier. And in this distribution, people on the left has higher priority, and this is uniform, okay? And I have 100 essential personnel, but also I have 100 general category people. So basically there are twice as many people as the units, okay? Now, let me first process the open units and then the essential personnel reserve as I indicate here, right? Open and then essential personnel. If I do that, the highest priority for the general category person and the highest priority for the essential personnel will receive a unit each. So this will fill kind of at an even speed, given this particular examples, specifics, right? And then I have 20 essential personnel reserve left, which will go to the next 20 essential personnel in the queue. So the allocation will be 40 units will go to general category and 60 units will go to the essential personnel. Now, let me reverse the order of precedence, okay? Let me first allocate the reserve units and then the open units. If I do that, then the highest priority 20 people, 20 essential personnel will receive the essential personnel reserve. But observe that when I did that, I changed the nature of the competition here, right? The highest score people who are essential personnel are all gone, right? So when I'm now competing for open positions, open in competition, until the gap closes, all the units will go to general category, right? And only then the remaining 60 open units will be shared 50-50, right? And the eventual outcome will be 50 units will go to essential personnel and 50 units will go to general community. It is this observation Trump administration made in a few years ago to dramatically change the distribution of the outcome, okay? And it is this kind of mistake which led to Boston Public Schools to lose works on priority unintentionally. Okay, so the example shows that there may be several cutoff matchings. The processing sequence of categories is important, and reserves may sometimes be redundant. Under this policy where you first process the essential reserve and then open, we call minimum guarantee, right? And in this example, if there was no reserve, the outcome would still be 50-50. So in this environment, reserve did nothing, right? Okay. And so let me give some some results, analytical results. Now, right now, I am not putting any structure on the structure of categories, their membership. They can overlap. You know, you can have really, lots of interesting structures and priorities. Whereas in this example, I had lots of structure, right? There was a common baseline ranking. That model is very important and it's very common. So I will study that one too. And indeed, our initial results in the literature were in that model. But right now, I'm a lot more flexible. I'm not assuming anything, except I'm focusing on sequential procedures. Let an order of precedence prime be obtained from another one just by processing category C earlier in the sequence, but otherwise keeping everything else the same. Okay? You just move a category earlier without altering anything else. When I do that, the cutoff for category C gets more competitive. Okay? The earlier a category is processed, the more selective it becomes. Okay? Now let me put some additional structure. Now let's consider a version of the problem, very common in real-life applications, where there is an unreserved category U, which is also often called open category, with the baseline priority order pi U. Okay? Any other category C is a preferential treatment category, which gives preferential treatment to a beneficiary group IC, people from hard-hit communities, essential personnel. Okay, so now what I'm doing is, even though initially category was not attached to a person, groups of person, it was attached to ethical criteria. Or if you think about German college admissions, you know, some of the slots are assigned based on how long you waited, some of them based on an exam score. That application would require a more general structure like the one I studied so far. But in many others, there is an underlying, typically merit metric based on some examination. Okay, so that is captured by pi U. And any other category is preferential treatment category attached to a group of people that you want to benefit. Now, pi C, the priority for that category, preferential treatment category, is simply constructed from the baseline priority by upgrading the beneficiaries at the very top, but otherwise keeping the relative order of everybody within group as in the baseline priority order. Okay. Now, I can do at least two things here. I can have hard reserves where for these preferential treatment categories, where anybody else who is not in IC is not even qualified. This is the case in H-1B application. For the 20,000 advanced degree units, other people are not eligible even if you cannot consume all of them, even if you cannot allocate all of them. Or this is also the case in India for vertical reservations for scheduled castes and scheduled tribes. Okay, but in other applications, you have soft reserves. You give priority to IC, but the priorities are soft in the sense that if you cannot fill all these units, everybody else, they are still considered, right? They just have lower priority. That we call soft reserves. Hard reserves are a lot easier to analyze than soft reserves in terms of analytical results, okay? The set of general community patients are those who are beneficiaries of the open category or the unreserved category only. The next result is very similar to the previous result, but now I'm looking at this special version of the model. So consider a reserve system with hard reserves. So let's look at the easier version first. And let an order of precedence be obtained from another one by just moving a category earlier in the sequence, processing earlier, okay? In the abstract world, that was making this prime category more competitive. In this world, I can say that it is also worse for its beneficiaries, right? In this version of the model, I'm able to attach people with categories. So now I can say what happens when the competition becomes harsher for you. Well, naturally, it becomes worse. In this case, it becomes worse in a very strong sense, okay? And that means the earlier a preferential treatment category is processed, the worse it is for its categories. But in my application, hard reserves might be too much to assume, like with ventilator allocation, like keep it idle, even if other people die, right? So you might want to consider soft reserves, okay? Now, for the soft reserves, this result also holds, provided that there are at most 5 categories, and each patient is beneficiary of at most one preferential treatment category. If you drop any of these assumptions, I can give you examples, right? So, I mean, this is not important at all for practitioners or to people I talk, but the proof for this very last remark is like, 14 pages because no general argument exists. It depends on, brute force, whereas you can give a general argument, much simpler proof for hard reserves. And the issue here is why it might not hold for soft reserves. The thing is, if I'm a beneficiary to a category, it is not only that category I'm getting a unit from. I may also get it from the open category, right? And in a way, a category which is not filled becomes like an open category, and it can also come through other categories that are not filled, right? This can lead to funny scenarios where even though the change is bad for my category, a fortunate sequence of cycles might happen, which might help me with the unit that opened at some category. Okay, so that's the kind of reason why soft reserves is much harder. But as long as you have at most 5 categories, it's good. Over and above implementation is when reserve category is processed after the open category. It provides strong benefit, and it is best suited for situations that warrants an extra boost. Real life applications of over and above implementation is public positions in India, vertical reservations for scheduled castes, scheduled tribes, other backwards castes, school choice in Chicago, H-1B visa allocation, for example. Minimum guarantee implementation is when reserve category is processed prior to open category. It provides weaker benefit compared to over and above implementation. It may provide no benefit at all if target minimum already reached in the absence of reserve. and it's best suited for situations that warrant a protective measure. Okay, and this also has several real-life applications, although it is not the case that, I mean, policymakers will have these intentions, they just wouldn't know how to do it with the formula. And that is why so many mistakes are made, or that is why this important parameter is overseen. Congress wanted to have a control of the H-1B allocation, so they specified what are the categories and what are their sizes, thinking they can control the outcome with that. But then Trump administration observes that, well, you can actually change the outcome as much as like 15% just by changing the order of precedence, and changes the outcome dramatically. That happened in 2019. We have a recent paper on H-1B visa allocation where we document that. More interestingly, two other differences happened in earlier years where the change was due to something completely unrelated. Okay, like they had to go from timing in terms of priority to random lotteries. A change like that resulted in a completely undiscussed change in the distribution of the outcome. And we have strong reason to believe that we are the first ones to actually realize that this happened, and nobody realized until Trump administration observed it and use it for their policy objectives. So this is important. Now, I mentioned that sequential reserve processing is essentially the only one that is used in real-life applications. And it is important to understand these policy procedures, obviously, because it is the one that is used. But in some of my recent papers, I'm pushing for a smarter approach due to some limitations of these sequential reserve processing systems. And let me illustrate the situation with two examples. The first one will be more relevant for hard reserves, but I will also show an issue for the soft reserves. Suppose we have just two units, one open, one reserve, okay? And reserves are hard. Only the red individual one is eligible for the pink essential personnel reserve, okay? So if I first process the open unit, the gray open unit, it goes to the highest priority person under the baseline priority, which is the red guy. And when I do that, no one who is eligible for the pink unit is left. So you end up with an idle unit. Okay. This system is non-wasteful in the way we defined, but not non-wasteful in a broader sense. Right? So is our non-wastefulness axiom doesn't imply, for instance, Pareto efficiency. Okay. Now, what I can do is, if I first fill the open reserve unit, then the red individual will get the red unit, red essential personnel, and the open unit can go to the individual 2 who is eligible. Okay? So basically, the outcome depends on the sequence and depends on nasty ways. Okay, and this kind of suggests that maybe you want to be kind of smart about how you use these reserves rather than doing everything in a fixed way. Okay, that's the intuition I'm trying to give. That was an issue for hard reserves. With soft reserves, you would fill all the units. But let me show another issue even with soft reserves. I have 3 units now, one open, one essential personnel reserve, and one red essential personnel reserve, and one blue disadvantaged reserve. Are the purple red guy, purple individual 2 is eligible both for red and blue, But the blue person, I4, is eligible only for disadvantage reserve, blue disadvantage, and the red I3 is only eligible for the red unit. Okay, everybody is eligible for the black unit. Okay, so now if I process first essential personnel category, then disadvantage, then open, the top I2 will get the pink unit, then the I4 will get the blue unit, and the highest priority person for the remaining unit is I1. So when I did that, I match the top guy, the second guy, and the last guy. And suppose this baseline priority is based on an exam, for instance. Okay, it's a ranking that you actually care. Now, let me first process the disadvantage category and then the essential personnel category. If I do that, now the more flexible purple guy, the purple guy is the key here, right? I can give him anything. Like now she will consume the blue unit because I'm starting with allocating blue units. And then the essential personnel unit will go to the I3 and the open unit will still go to I1. But you know what? I matched the top 3 guys. If I can accommodate affirmative action considerations in a way admitting all the highest score kids, why wouldn't I want to do that, right? And you cannot do it if you fix a sequencing process. This observation is critical, directly critical for the application in Chile, actually. They make that mistake and they can correct it. Okay. Let me add an additional axiom called maximality in beneficiary assignment. And I'll be very fast here. For the more sophisticated part, I will just give the intuition now. The next axiom helps us to avoid any efficiency loss by precluding the myopic assignments of patients to categories. I will say that a matching is maximal in beneficiary assignment if it maximizes the total number of units awarded to target beneficiaries of categories. So the first assignment, which was leaving idle unit, will just not be acceptable anymore, okay? Together with non-wastefulness, this axiom implies parity efficiency, actually, okay? Now, I will introduce another technology, which we call smart reserve matching. And I cannot give the details here, but the main idea is determining which agents are to be matched with some category in a greedy manner, following their baseline priorities without committing for a category, okay, while assuring maximality in beneficiary assignment, okay? This can be done in multiple ways, actually, depending on when you process the unreserved units. If all unreserved units are processed at the very end of the procedure, this extreme case of the algorithm generates a minimum guarantee version of the smart matching technology. Whereas if all unreserved units are processed at the very beginning, the other extreme generates an over and above version of the smart reserve matching. What do I mean? Okay. First of all, the entire class that I introduced satisfies the 3 axioms, which was basically, which characterize also cutoff matching or DA-induced matchings. Okay. But now I'm having a selection, smart selection from it. And the 4th axiom gives me the smart matching. Okay. But this is one way, not a full characterization. But I have the following result. Let omega be any over and above smart reserve matching, where the unreserved units are processed at the very end. Let mu be any minimum guarantee smart reserve matching. And let nu, black nu, be any matching which satisfies the 4 axioms now. 3 original plus the 1 additional, okay? Then for the open category, for the people who are just eligible for unreserved units, okay? The worst one is W. It's the most competitive one for them. And minimum guarantee is the least competitive for them. These are the people who are not eligible for preferential treatment. Okay? You cannot give a similar result for categories because the kind of accidents that I mentioned can also happen there. Because if I'm eligible for essential personnel reserve, something bad might happen for essential personnel category, but I might luck out for a position that is opening. Okay, that's why I'm only make a statement for people who are not qualified from any preferential treatment. However, I can make statements for aggregates in total number of people benefiting from these. Okay, all these matchings, among all matchings, that's set aside the 4 axioms over and above. One is the most selective one, and minimum guarantee smart matchings are the least selective one for undeserved category. This ends the formal part of my presentation. Okay. And it's a little bit too formal, right? This, who cares for this stuff? But I kind of indicated, right? Trump administration cared. And in India, actually, it turns out they have a more complicated version of the problem, which led to thousands of court cases. And I have a paper on them. And indeed, 2 months ago, Supreme Court endorsed my mechanism, which was apparently reinvented by Gujarat High Court 4 months ago, and mandated in the entire state. And that law, that change, was there for 25 years. So these procedures are important and they affect our real lives. But also in this context, this is just one of many references. This just happened yesterday, so I'm very excited because I just saw it yesterday. So Hellman and Nicholson, they want to use our technology to advance the rights, disability rights. Okay, as I mentioned, there were lots of lawsuits in Alabama, in Washington, so on and so forth, right? Without concrete solutions, there's lots of fight, but no concrete solution. So they want to use this technology to protect their rights. Okay, but look at all this discussion they are giving. They talk about precedents, which one is legally appropriate for what group. And then they're saying, while a discussion of mathematics of the reserve system is beyond the scope of this paper, what is important to understand is that the model provides an algorithm that enables policymakers to allocate resources according to multiple principles, one that can be fashioned in advance and applied much like the algorithm's SAFA type scoring. For our purposes, this method provides a middle road between the goals of saving the most lives and ensuring that benefits and harms are distributed fairly. In my research, the most important thing is not the result, even though that's what the referees seem to care about. The most important thing is the model, right? If I can have a model with an important insight, which maps very realistically to what's going on, that is the one that will make a difference in the field. And this is the most related literature. So now in my last 11 minutes, I will talk about the path between theory and practice. Okay. Exactly 1 year ago today, New England Journal of Medicine published a piece called Fair Allocation of Scarce Medical Resources in the Time of COVID. Okay. And this is how we learned this problem. And basically, at the end, what they are saying is to help clinicians navigate these challenges, institutions may employ triage officers, physicians in roles outside direct patient care, or committees of experienced physicians and ethicists to help apply guidelines to assist with rationing decisions or to make implement choices outright, relieving the individual frontline clinicians of that burden. This was initially done for ventilators, okay? So our first response was, shouldn't experts from analytical fields such as economists, operations research, computer scientists also be part of these designs? And I already knew that. I mean, I already have seen what happened at Indian Supreme Court, what happened in Boston, what happened in H1B. I already suspected that, maybe they might not have the technology to do what they wanted. Okay. So also, At the time, together with Parag, Pathak, and Utku Unver, we were already working on a book chapter on the general theory of reserve systems. Upon observing the limitations of the existing rationing systems, and especially the inability of New York State and Minnesota ventilator allocation committees to accommodate essential personnel prior to, due to these limitations, we knew that the reserve system is the answer, okay? Because they need a system that allows for compromise. A priority system doesn't allow it. So we have already seen what was going on, what was going wrong in New York State and Minnesota, okay? So we've repurposed our book chapter and circulated the first version of our working paper in April 2020, okay? 2 days after we circulated the first draft of our paper, Massachusetts announced its ventilator allocation guidelines. But something was not quite right. Even though the announced priority point system did not have any priority points for medical personnel status, the Boston Globe headline suggested otherwise, okay? So the curb for this confusion was an informal referral to heightened priority for medical personnel. This observation made us believe that the committee in Massachusetts may have faced similar challenges to those faced earlier by the committees in New York State and Minnesota. They just didn't know what to do, just add a footnote there, informal, so hope that trouble gets away, okay? So we reach out to Robert Trog, a member of the committee and a leading bioethicist who has co-authored another influential piece on the ethics of pandemic triage. On the same day, actually, okay? There was a symposium where these two papers were the lead papers. Robert Trog immediately responded to our inquiry and proposed a collaboration, also including Govind Persad, one of the lead authors of the New England Journal of Medicine piece that motivated our initial interest, and Douglas White, a professor of clinical care medicine, well known for his priority point system for ventilator allocation. We were actually criticizing his system in our paper for ventilator allocation. Joining forces with Trog, Persad, and White, over the next several months, we engage in various outreach activities to introduce the reserve system to bioethicists and emergency care communities. Writing the paper is maybe 10% of the job for us, okay? So we need to, explain it to people, we need to convince them, and if it is not their problem, if they don't feel their problem, you'll not present the model and convince them that, oh, I have that problem, let me change the system. That will not happen, okay? Through these efforts, we introduced the reserve system to several groups and started collaborating with bioethicist Harold Schmidt, who was especially interested in utilizing it to mitigate disparities in healthcare access, okay? So the first concrete outcome of our collaboration was a design of an antiviral medication, antiviral medicine allocation guideline at University of Pittsburgh Medical Center, which was subsequently endorsed by the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania throughout the state. So this happened very early on in May, actually. Okay. So reserve categories here were based on the combinations of three considerations: hardest hit, essential personnel, and the expected life of the patient. And the priorities were based on lottery. This was used in May 2020 for allocation of the antiviral remdesivir. Okay. By the late summer of 2020, our focus have mostly shifted from ventilator and antiviral rationing to the upcoming vaccine rollout. Okay. Since the beginning of the pandemic, there has been a vigorous debate on equitable vaccine allocation, and I'm sure everybody in the audience is familiar with this debate. Until NASAM's announcement of its preliminary framework for equitable vaccine allocation in September 2020, these debates were purely focused on the structure of priority tiers under a presumed priority system. For example, Melinda Gates in June 2020, we care about this vaccine getting out equitably. The first people that need this vaccine are the 60 million healthcare workers around the world. they deserve to get it before anybody else. Then you start tiering. In the US, that would be Black people next, quite honestly, and many other people of color. They are having disproportionate effect from COVID-19. Well, with these announcements, there is an impasse, right? Because you don't have a compromise under the priority system. So this resembles the crisis for ventilators, right? The New York's crisis, the Minnesota's crisis. So there has been an impasse. Many are arguing that there shouldn't be priority for hard-hit communities, and basically nothing was happening. People were just, arguing. Okay. In July 2020, CDC and NIH commissioned the National Academies of Sciences, Engineering and Medicine, NASAM, to formulate their recommendations on the equitable allocation of a COVID-19 vaccine. NASAM appointed a committee of distinguished experts who had members who actually was a moderator of a presentation I gave at Johns Hopkins to an interdisciplinary group. In September 2020, a preliminary discussion draft of the framework for equitable allocation of COVID-19 vaccine is made public. Okay? They announced a tiered priority system, but they also indicate that equity is a cross-cutting consideration. This is a bit like what was going on in Massachusetts, right? There is this hot potato kind of issue that you just do not know how to deal with it. Immediately following the NASAM discussion draft, comments from the public were solicited through a formal process. That is why it is a discussion draft. In his written and oral comments, University of Pennsylvania bioethicist Harold Schmidt has inquired about the recommended mechanism to prioritize members of hard-hit communities. In preparation for this contingency, and in collaboration with Harold Schmidt, weeks earlier, we circulated the working paper, Pathak et al., another paper, illustrating how easily a traditional tiered priority system can be modified as a reserve system by building equity into the system through an index of social vulnerability. We are doing this not with race, but rather with an index to avoid legal challenges, okay? This precise formulation was brought to the attention of the committee as a possible mechanism to embed equity in their framework. Around the same time, something amazing happened. In response to NASAM discussion draft, JAMA published a viewpoint by the lead points of the paper that motivated our paper, and which very much guided this entire discussion in the world, okay, who endorsed our proposed reserve system in their conclusion. Dividing the initial vaccine allotment into priority access categories and using medical criteria to prioritize within each category is a promising approach. For instance, half of the initial allotment might be prioritized for frontline health workers and so on and so forth. Such a categorized approach would be preferable to the tiered ordering previously used for influenza vaccines, because it ensures that multiple priority groups will have initial access to vaccines. Okay. Next month, NASAM published their final framework for equitable allocation of COVID-19 vaccine based on the ethical values formulated in Emanuel et al. And their framework now formally recommended a 10% reserve for people from hard-hit areas. Not only they recommended a reserve, they recommended it exactly because of the reasons that we suggested, because of its ability to be a compromising tool. The committee does not propose an approach in which within each phase, all vaccine is first given the people in highest VI areas. They're saying, we are not saying the same thing Melinda Gates is saying, right? Don't just reject immediately. Rather, the committee proposes that SVI be used in two ways. First, as previously noted, the reserved 10% portion of the total federal allocation of COVID-19 vaccine may be reserved to target areas with high SVI, defined as the top 25% of the SVI distribution within the state. SVI meaning socioeconomic vulnerability index. Immediately after NASAM announcement, Tennessee adopted a reserve system for vaccine allocation, and it became the first state to adopt a reserve system for the vaccine rollout. But we were obviously extremely excited. So now we are thinking many states will adopt. But nothing happened for a few months, okay? And we were slightly nervous. And also we were dealing with other applications. We were designing a system for Massachusetts for the monoclonal allocation. But we also co-hosted a conference, a symposium. So in December 2020, in part to illustrate policymakers how easily equity can be built into vaccine rollout through a reserve system, we co-hosted a symposium in collaboration with Ariadne Labs, Harvard Chan School of Public Health, and UPenn's Department of Medical Ethics and Health Policy. The symposium not only helped us to better understand the needs, challenges, and perspectives of several jurisdictions, but it also directly contributed to two important developments. First, it provided our co-organizers from Ariadne Labs with a natural opportunity to bring the reserve system to the attention of the committee responsible for vaccine rollout in Massachusetts. Similarly, it provided our group with an opportunity to bring the reserve system to the attention of California Surgeon General, Dr. Nadine Burka-Harris. In a number of group meetings, we introduced the reserve system to Dr. Harris and her team, advocated for its adoption in California as an instrument to build in equity in their upcoming vaccine rollout, and coach members of her team on the subtleties of the reserve system of the sort that I've been talking about. Okay. In December 2020, a few weeks after the symposium, Massachusetts became the second state to adopt a particularly ambitious reserve system for its vaccine rollout for 20% over and above for the least privileged quartile. Incidentally, this is exactly one of the scenarios we analyze in the white paper that we provided NASAM. The other scenario was a 10% that was formally announced, suggested by NASAM. In March 20, a few weeks earlier, California adopted a particularly ambitious reserve system for its vaccine rollout with reserve categories both for educators and hard-hit populations. 10% weekly for educators and 40% for the least privileged quartile of their own index. California developed their own index. One interesting thing is they actually announced the total reserve, abstracting away from the part they are getting from the open part, whereas Massachusetts announced the over and above part. Actually, with uniform distribution, these two are identical. Not when you have different priorities. Effectively, they are doing the same thing. But, California chose to, emphasize the total amount that group is getting, which is about another dimension of this research program. With the reserves, because this processing sequence is tricky, there are lots of misunderstandings, and population responds a lot to the size of the reserve, but not in other details. So in a way, to me, this is another very interesting aspect, behavioral aspect of this line of policy work and research. Now, reserve system is gaining a lot more attention than we ever hoped for. And to be honest, when we started writing this paper, we hoped that maybe for the next pandemic, if that happens, it might be useful. Maybe as a preparation for ventilator guidelines, it could be useful. We didn't think, we would see it happen, in this pandemic, but it is happening. And the chances are it will happen more and more because it's gaining momentum now. People are paying a lot of attention to this technology, which didn't exist in those literatures before. Okay. Now, while equity and social justice considerations have been the driving force in most jurisdictions for the acceptance of reserve systems, it is not the only reason. Phase 1B vaccine rollout in Richmond, Virginia is a good example. They have a very elaborate reserve system which utilizes category-specific priorities, which is an important feature absent under the priority system. Now they are able to use this feature. Okay. Our proposed reserve system is also gaining some traction for allocation of medical resources other than vaccines. The Department of Public Health assembled a working group to advise on equitable allocation of COVID-19 therapies delivered to Massachusetts in the event of a shortage. A member of the working group, Dr. Emily Rubin from Mass General Hospital, inquired to our group whether our proposed reserve system can be used for equitable allocation of COVID-19 monoclonal antibody therapies, and if so, how it can be operationalized in practice. Our group supported the working group with a reserve system design tailored to the specifications for Massachusetts policies and provided them with an Excel sheet implementation of the system. We have a web page called COVID-19reservesystem.org. All the academic developments, policy developments, links for software, media, policy impact, we are now organizing there. Okay. In November 2020, Massachusetts adopted a reserve system for monoclonal antibody therapy allocation. So this is their system. They even use our terminology. So obviously we are very proud of this. In other places, reserve system was used without really understanding what it does and cause lots of chaos. Reserve system can solve lots of problems, but it can also be exploited, manipulated, or lots of unintended consequences might be there if not designed right. So that's my way of saying, please still consult us, in design on these systems. Now, not everybody adopted reserve system, of course. For instance, Texas didn't. So Dallas wanted to prioritize minorities or hard-hit regions for vaccine allocation in a phase. And the state threatened to hold their share, and Dallas had to give up their system, right? State simply didn't allow. Maybe they would allow a reserve system if they did the same just for 10%, 20%. Maybe it wouldn't be seen. It still might, but who knows what happens. So anyways, no comment. I don't know what would happen. But obviously, it's less likely that the state would threaten the city. Or there was a mini crisis in Stanford when their algorithm allocated almost all units to people who are not frontline medical personnel. And you might have seen this crisis. And here they say our algorithm that the ethicists, infectious disease experts work on for weeks clearly didn't work right. Tim Morrison, the director of the ambulatory care team, told residents at the event in a video posted online. Okay. Well, this is my starting point, right? So maybe it would help the world-renowned market design experts at Stanford also to participate on that table, in those discussions, right? So in conclusion, in the first few months of the COVID-19 pandemic, many societies were caught unprepared when they needed guidelines for a possible ventilator rationing. At present, there is a worldwide need for policies and mechanisms for vaccine allocation. Poorly designed allocation mechanisms may damage the social contract between different segments of the society. widely accepted, but potentially competing ethical values for pandemic resource allocation require a mechanism to implement the desired balance of values. Finding the right mechanism to honor these principles is therefore important for maintaining the social fabric. Because the mechanism is just a tool to realize ethical values and not an end in itself, it should permit a wide range of options. The exclusion or inadequate balancing of certain ethical principles may do more harm than good. In a previous pandemic, the following statement was present in New York Times. Maybe you end up saving more people, but at the end you have got a society at war with itself. Some people are going to be told they don't matter enough. When revising or modifying guidelines during or after the COVID-19 pandemic, a reserve system should be part of the arsenal. And we are very optimistic that it actually might be. Well, thank you very much for your patience.
Okay, thank you very much, Tayfun, for a beautiful presentation. Maybe you would be willing to take some questions now?
I would love to take questions.
Okay, so if you want to ask a question, please unmute yourself and go ahead.
William, I have a question. So Tayfun, yeah, thanks for a wonderful talk, very stimulating. I'm a theorist, so I think my question will be a little on the theoretical side. So it appears to me that the reserve system embeds some kind of cardinal comparison across different priorities. So I've given this priority of this group of people 30 ventilators. So that's kind of a cardinal way to say this is a more important priority than another priority. And so isn't there a way to be more explicit about the kind of cardinal comparisons that go into a reserve system and the kind of cardinal comparisons that are not allowed by a reserve system? And how would one go about approaching this problem? And just to maybe relate to the comments you made, you said that in Stanford, there was a crisis and they said, wow, this reserve system doesn't work. Now, on what basis did they make that judgment that it doesn't work?
No, they didn't say the reserve system doesn't work.
Oh.
Whatever system they use doesn't work. They didn't use a reserve system.
Okay.
So their error was not reserving any units for the medical concern. So in medical ethics, for these guidelines, the way it typically works is a committee is formed. And they make the judgments on, which criteria are important, what kind of priorities you use. And it is not up to me to decide anything about the criteria. Now, and also observe that our technology builds on the existing technology of priority system. And this, for instance, in this environment, you cannot use constraint optimization or something like that. Real world doesn't work like that. There is no function to optimize. 20 different groups of people are trying to optimize different things. African Americans, they say SOFA scores don't work on us, right? Don't use it for us. It discriminates against us, right? So maybe there are some, objective functions, but there are too many of them and people cannot agree. So what happens is these committees are formed and they come up with a compromise, but they don't have a tool in this world with a clear, with a tool where the meaning of the compromise is clear. So when we circulated the paper within the month, we were so lucky that Boston announced their guideline, and I kind of sensed that they are under stress. And we approached them, and sure enough, they responded immediately. And we started collaborating with them, including with one of the lead authors of the main paper, Govind Persant, who became a huge advocate of reserve systems. Much of this impact is due to Govind's and Harold Schmidt's endless works. These outreach efforts are absolutely important. So, so basically, he also introduced us to a group from ACLU, Massachusetts ACLU. And we explained them that they were worried about the ventilator guidelines, but they have difficulty assessing the impact of the priority system in the guideline. And the thing that they are asking is, should we complain or not? I mean, is this good for us? So what does it do? Right? So in a way, the priority system, priority point system, obscures the discussion. Now, a reserve system at least makes it a little bit more apparent, but perhaps it appears a bit more apparent than it actually is. So this is the tricky thing with the reserve system. And that's why, like our paper, if you read it, it's like half white paper, half scholarly paper. White paper to help with the community. The scholarly part, the hardcore part, so that my referees don't bury me. I believe we do this in a smooth way. And a lot of effort is put on doing so, actually, right? I mean, it's kind of very difficult to do this, technical work, somewhat unintimidating to everybody else, right? Now they are using it in law journals, medical ethics, many groups endorse our system, not just. So basically, it is that committee's job to determine these, to bargain over these parameters. And and this is how it's done in India, right? It took 10 years of committee work by the Mandal Commission, and they come up with Indra Savni at the Supreme Court. Well, it turns out that court case formulated the axioms very well, but then somebody needs to implement them. Who will design the mechanism? Policymakers did. Lots of court cases, obviously, this is not in the job description when you recruit a policymaker. As a result, Supreme Court had to invent a mechanism. Anil Kumar Gupta. It turns out they made a small mistake in the algorithm, and there are thousands of court cases. And my point is, there are experts working on these problems where our job is not dictating our own values. I'm not living in my own bubble. I'm not trying to impose, okay, you should care for this, this, this. Okay, this is the interesting research problem. This is how we should solve it, right? Actually, a few weeks ago, Daniel Roderick had a beautiful piece in Project Syndicate called, can economists get along with non-economists, or how? And his point was, economics should be complementary, and that is exactly our approach. And that is why in our papers, the most important part is not the results. It is the model. It is the application. Okay. Now, we are fortunate that, we are trained by somebody like Williams. So, we are vigorous. We are formal, and fortunate enough that we have, sufficient, muscle power to prove, difficult theorems as well. If we didn't, some of the very important ideas would be completely dismissed. I mean, I have referee reports where some referees say, okay, I can see that lives will be saved, but not enough. Like, I mean, at most 100 lives. I have reports like that. I mean, so in a way, the publication process in economics, the incentive structure is kind of off, right? And our point is, okay, look, I need to do what people need me to do. I need to solve their problem. I will not be able to go there and tell them, this is your problem and I will solve it, and you'll spend lots of time fighting the institution to change it. It will not happen, right? This is not how we change school choice systems. This is not how we change how we created kidney exchange. We went and we said, you know what? We can save thousands of lives, and we are not making this up. And, you know, this rarely becomes successful, no matter how solid your research is. But if it is solid enough, occasionally it will happen if you are able to make a good case. And we are fortunate enough that this happened in multiple cases for our research program.
That's a quick question, Tayfun.
Mark? Yeah.
Hey, Mark.
Yeah. So I can see reasons you wouldn't want to go with an algorithm that saves the most lives. But now once I go with another algorithm, the reserve or some other one, that should be pretty straightforward to kick out the relative values put on the certain lives versus others to make that sort of transparent, though.
If there is a clear objective function agreed for population. Now, a large percent of the population is saying the objective cannot be just maximizing the life saved.
No, I'm saying, but once you go away from that, a byproduct of the algorithm you choose, you could kick out the shadow value on one life versus another, what's being valued on this group versus the other. That would be a nice transparent piece of information, I think.
Absolutely. Once this technology is available, all the kind of analysis that you are suggesting can be made, and we do make, right? But I cannot start with a piece, putting too much of my own ideas, embedding in the system. That will not go well with policymakers. I mean,
no, but it might be a useful way to communicate it.
Absolutely.
So they know exactly the choices they're making.
Absolutely. And that's what we do in school choice, in many other research programs. Now that we have the technology, what is the implications of this ethical criteria? You know, how is this coming at the loss of lives? Or maybe it doesn't actually, because of whatever. Absolutely. So, like we say, we are just providing the technology to be able to communicate and work with other fields for their objectives, but our tools are certainly flexible enough to analyze lots of different questions. And that's why this school choice became a huge literature now. I mean, there is a big empirical literature on school choice, so on and so forth. Absolutely. I mean, and I didn't mean that our tools are useless to mainstream economics. They are not. But my worry is sometimes economists are a little bit too demanding on how I even start attempting to answer this, these questions. So when I say, you know what, let's allow for exchange, kidney exchange, some will say, okay, look, you have to open up markets, and that's that. I cannot go with that position to the doctors, because they will not only think it is a bad idea, they will think only bad people have that idea. So this will be the end of the discussion, right? So I need to understand what is feasible, what is not feasible. I mean, in our interactions, it is absolutely important to give the right impression in the first meeting, if you ever get that. You have to, your model should be right. You need to understand what was the issue, and it has to be clear to the person that you are communicating that, okay, you know what, maybe I shouldn't get rid of these guys. Maybe we can do something together.
Okay, any other question? Actually, I have one. Of course, I was delighted to see your focus on fairness. and equity and those ethical values that you talked about. But in virtually all of your previous papers, you talk about strategic issues. And,
what issues?
Strategic issues. So I'd like to know what are the strategic issues here? I think implicitly you touched upon that, but is there anything else that you could say?
Okay, so it's getting dark here. Just a second. I'm not running away. Okay. Now, it's an interesting question. This particular paper doesn't have too many, strategic elements. Although I'm sure, we can invent some. But let me give you a very concrete, related application. Immediately after we circulated that paper, I don't have Twitter, I have Facebook, so I sometimes publicize some of this stuff here. And we were really excited about our paper, so we circulated. And one of the comments was about convalescent plasma. Okay, so in the Facebook, I was seeing all these inquiries about, first in Turkey, people were looking for donor. Okay, and even one of them I wrote, I responded, I mean, you got to specify what kind of donor. I mean, I wasn't aware that the issue was convalescent plasma donor for people, who got sick, recovered, and now, their antibodies can be used. It wasn't happening in the US at the time, but apparently this was happening already in Turkey, and people were using it, okay? And the way the system is designed in Turkey was, you gotta find your own donor. At least, that was, initially you should put a lot of effort to find your own donor. But this created an absurd incentive structure where, if I get sick, I know how bad the situation is, okay? Who knows what will happen to my loved ones in 2 months, okay? They can get sick. When they get sick, they will need to find a donor. If I can donate now, who knows if I'll be able to donate then, right? So people are having lots of challenge to find donors. So what did we propose? We propose some of the plasma donations reserved for incentives, to create good incentives. 2 kinds of incentives. One, forward incentives, one backward incentives. So one, if I donate today, I'm receiving vouchers that can be used for my loved ones in case in the future they need it, right? So basically, this plasma that you have, I'm making it transferable to your loved ones. And even if they live far away, even if the blood type doesn't hold, and the blood type works exactly in the opposite way compared to, organ transplantation. Okay, so here AB is the universal donor. So basically, we offered that system. We actually wrote another paper on this. And the other incentive was, I also proposed the following. Suppose I don't have a voucher, but I vouch that if you give me priority for plasma so that I get the treatment now, when I get better hopefully in 5 weeks, I will donate myself. I promise. Okay? You cannot legally do that, but with kidney exchanges, with kidney chains, most people who promise, they hold their promise. Okay. Now, one person can have enough antibodies for about 9 people across multiple sessions. So this is a resource which multiplies, right? Any person who needs the good in this case is also a potential supply. There is a very interesting analytical structure here, right? So even if a quarter of these people, do not opt out later on, the system still keeps growing, right? So basically, you can embed in the system a structure which automatically makes donating more plausible, more attractive, right? So in that particular case, the room for incentives was very clear. And indeed, so before monoclonal antibodies were produced, convalescent plasma is the first line treatment here. Then you have an intermediate program, I think it's HIG. And the best one is monoclonal antibody. So basically, ours paper was relevant for the first two. And actually, if you remember, at the beginning of the pandemic, there was a crisis in New York City. And pandemic hit the Jewish community, Orthodox Jewish community really hard at the very beginning. I don't know if you remember. And then they actually found lots of donors for convalescent plasma. That group actually adopted our system at some point, because after the initial crises were over, the donation rates reduced, and they liked our idea, and they adopted our incentive scheme. We tried to have this implemented with Mayo Clinic too, but I mean, like I say, I mean, if you have 10 good ideas, if they're really good, maybe one of them will be successful if you are as persistent as I am. I mean, impact doesn't come easy.
Okay.
Can I ask a question, William?
Anyone else?
Yes.
Go ahead.
May I?
Oh, absolutely. I mean,
yeah. Correct me if I've got you wrong, but I mean, we're trying to allocate a scarce, valuable resource in a context where there's a lot of private information about demand that we don't have. The only mechanism we know of that will solve that kind of problem is a market. And I understand you to be saying, well, we can't talk about markets because that's just going to scare people off and then they won't listen to us. But why isn't this easy to explain?
Who decided that the only, so first of all, I mean, I pretty much disagree with pretty much everything you said, but
I thought it was what you were saying. So
market mechanism is a specific mechanism which works well in some environments. There are all these market failures, and if you are trying to optimize a particular objective function, if everybody agrees on that, if you don't have market, frictions, then market mechanism might reach somewhere.
No, we use markets precisely when we don't all agree on the objective function. So, right? That's exactly what we have markets.
I don't know what kind of market you are mentioning, but
okay. So for example,
monetized market.
For example, I like to stay home and read. Walkoff loves to dance. I'm ahead of him in line for a vaccine. Why can't I sell my place in line to him? I'm the wrong
person to discuss this. This is the job. So you should discuss this with medical ethicists. So I made my position absolutely clear. I want to change the world, and I will engage in interactions where I can do that. I will not pick up a fight.
My specific question is, why is that so hard to explain to these people? Why do you feel like it would be difficult to explain this?
I do not know. I mean, why couldn't Gary Becker convince a monetized market for kidney when I'm now saving thousands of lives every year as a much less, I mean, obviously, I'm not at an illusion to compare myself with Gary Becker, and yet, our ideas are gaining acceptance, whereas, monetized market for organs is not moving anywhere. People are worried about many things. I agree with some, not agree with all of them. But my position is, I let others to fight on this, so that they can do whatever I do. I want to pick fights that I can help with, and so we changed the school choice systems in 40 countries. These kidney exchange systems are adopted in dozens of countries now, and we didn't use traditional market mechanisms, right? So I understand that economists have a lot of value to offer, but let me also tell you something. So my impression is economists live in a bubble. They have a model. At some point, they start believing their models and values and objectives a little bit too much, to an extent that they think this is the only way to think. And in a way, this causes lots of frictions with other fields, right? I mean, if you read Danny Roderick's piece on, economists and non-economics not being able to getting along, he complains that, he talks about Gell-Mann and, causality, both directions. Economists focus on one direction, less quantitative fields focus on other direction. And so I'm not suggesting that market is not valuable. And indeed, it might be a lot more valuable, but I will let others to convince the other fields to rely on these insights, while if I can use the techniques, technology, the approach, the axiomatic approach I learned from William to formulate what Supreme Court is trying to do, if I can produce that product to them, I want to do that. I will not go to Supreme Court and say, you know what? I mean, why do you worry about 3,000 years of discrimination? It is the past. Look forward. I will not pick that fight. Other people are already fighting, taking this fight. So this is similar. So
there's other ways that you can use some private information without even explicitly prices. You could allow one person to donate it to somebody else. Then you'd have to see whether there was a transaction. Somebody could just donate it to some group where they feel, suppose I don't feel like it's so valuable to me, but I'm eligible. But I think if I give it to somebody, I have a say of who goes ahead. I mean, there's other ways potentially to use private information without literally a market. You could put up barriers to certain ways that people, I don't know,
I don't disagree with any.
There's a more general issue. Is there some way to try to induce private information in general? I would take that as a slightly more general question. I agree with Steve. The markets will induce the private information, but is that there's no other way that you can try to incorporate some private information into the?
I mean, I have no clue. Meaning I do not know the answer to that question, if there is anything that can be done. All I know is what I can do, and what I pay attention is, I pay attention to what people in the field are trying to do but unable to, and can I fill that gap? Now, often, if I can form that trust and relation, I might be able to go ahead with more fancy ideas, actually. Once I establish that trust and confidence, once they know, I'm not just coming with ideas, some of which they find offensive. So if I go with the market idea, the first sentence of the World Health Organization guideline is, you cannot sell vaccine. It is offensive. Now, I will not fight World Health Organization. Steve can. And please do. And I will not. What I will do is, I will try to show that we have tools, methodologies, ideas that are capable of helping them in their own approaches. And that requires me to adopt a model, not that is necessarily very popular among economists, but rather a model that is, that will be accepted among people in the field.
If I would just like to interject, you talked about economists living in bubbles where they see the world through the eyes of their models, but the existence of valuable private information is not model dependent. That's a fact about the world.
So once again, some models are better than other models. Certainly, why do we design all these systems about incentives? And indeed, that was William's point. There isn't too much about private information here. So you know what? We circulated a paper in 10 days at a very high level after that crisis began. And within a year now it is used. And believe me, I didn't do anything else in this year. We met more than 100 groups in Zoom meetings explaining these ideas. So many of these, I'm sure, a lot can be done, but there are many economists.
I still don't understand why in those meetings you can't explain that some people need to get back to the office more desperately than other people need to get back to the office, and we need to find a way to address that issue.
So because I have very limited time, these people are very skeptical of economists in general. And have you ever interacted with a policymaker, Steve, on a problem like, and did you have any luck, changing an institution in an environment like this? Have you attempted? So these interactions are not easy. Many things that you do not see.
The answer to your question is that I've spoken to audiences of policymakers. I have no idea whether any of them were listening.
See, okay, like I made my objective very clear. So I want to change the world. I want to show we can be of use, right? And my approach is, how can I use my skills, methodologies in a way to help with their problem, in the way they want it to be solved? Now, as I do that with Boston Public Schools, there was a huge incentive problem in their system. And Boston Public Schools, they were very proud of their mechanism. They were marketing that as, we are matching 95% of the people to one of their top 3 choices. Okay? I was thinking, I'm doomed. These guys are proud of what they are doing, but the only reason they have that rate is the system punishes you if you do not rank a school where you are likely to be accepted as your top choice. The system penalizes you deeply, right? And the entire issue was fixing that, and this can be fixed. So indeed, it is possible to explain them, but many places will get offended. They are telling to their constituency, we are able to match 95% of the people to their top choices. I'm trying to make a change in Turkey for the last 25 years, and it's not working there. But in Boston, it did. So I told them, look, there is one important issue. You guys are very proud of this aspect. You are matching people to their top 3 choices. If you adopt my mechanism, you'll not be able to do that because people will not be truthful, and you will see. But this will bring you, these kind of benefits. And to my surprise, they said, Valerie Edwards, if we change the mechanism, we'll promote it the way that is adequate. We just want to do what is best for our people. Now, this was a very rare situation. Usually doesn't happen. So in these interactions, not only I need to come up with an innovation, I need to, foresee the games that are played within the system, okay? Some of them told, some of them untold, right? Right now, we are changing Army's cadet branch matching system, right? So with enough effort, with high quality work, you can change that system, okay? But people are not thrilled, policymakers, when you go and tell them you are doing that wrong. And you need to establish clear value to them. So once again, obviously, I'm an economist. I'm benefiting from these tools. But what I'm suggesting is, the model I have in mind, I'm trained to, might not be a model, people in social scientists, doctors might be willing to accept.
But on the other hand, people don't accept your models at first either, and you work for 25 years, and then you finally get somebody to understand what you're doing, and maybe if you were pushing markets, you would have the same kind of success.
So, to my surprise, we changed quite a few markets, but not through the market mechanism. And my expertise is especially in areas where, money doesn't do the trick. You have to do other things. And I'm sure with all the brain power and economics, there must be others, who can also bring. It's not like, I needed to move from Turkey to US to be able to push these proposals. They don't happen automatically. I'm pretty proud of the judgment I use in those very first meetings, right? It is important for me to assess what is feasible, what is not, what is offensive. It's not like people are looking forward to hearing from me. When we went for kidney exchange and told them we can help increasing kidney transplants, the first sentence is, how can an economist help me? Will you donate? Right? So we need to get around these kind of considerations. I highly recommend reading Daniel Roderick's March 9 piece, actually, on economists and non-economists getting along.
Okay. Thank you, Tayfun. Maybe one more very quick question, or rather a question that would call for a quick answer.
I think I made lots of enemies today.
So if not, I think, thank you very much, Tayfun. It was a wonderful.
No. I'm a few months ago, I gave a talk at Tokyo, which started at 12 midnight. And then I started taking questions until 2:30 in the morning for some very interested audience. And we had that symposium that I was mentioning for policymakers at 10 a.m. next morning. So I am accused of many things, but now, being unwilling to talk. So I'll be here.
Okay,
Thank you.
thank you.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you. I mean,
So still, we're going to say goodbye, Tayfun. Thank you so much. And
Thank you,
I think George is going to stay online because he had this scheduled a meeting with you and he couldn't meet you before. So thank you very much. And
well, thank you. I mean, this is I'm absolutely.
I apologize for delaying that.
it's too bad we couldn't.
No, I mean, I think this is.
Oh, sorry, I stopped the recording, so now everyone can say what they feel.
Okay.
So in any case, I think.
So it sounds like if these guys had their druthers, economists would be at the last of the list.